marriage, family, child rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. It is our Friday weekend edition. In just a few minutes, we'll have Kelly Shackelford and Penna Dexter joining us. And, of course, we have a lot to talk about. A vote to proceed on impeachment, but it really was a non-vote. We'll get more into that. And some have referred to this as defining impeachment downs. We'll talk about what that means, what is actually in this resolution, what can various committees do on this impeachment investigation, and what is missing from some of this conversation will be something that we'll be having. I know that Kelly Shackelford wants to talk about what has become an incredible smear campaign against one individual who is going to be put on the federal court. And so we'll talk about that, whether or not there's been a borking of this individual, Lawrence Van Dyke. Elizabeth Warren has released her medical plan and says that we can actually spend $52 trillion on Medicare for all, and none of your taxes will go up. And that's funded by Rainbows and Unicorns, I'm pretty sure, but we'll get into some of those details a little bit later, and we have a lot more to cover. But I thought for just a few minutes, especially for our Dallas listeners, but for all of you, you would want to know about an organization that I'm going to have a chance to hear more about on Sunday, because they're going to be having their special banquet. It is the Lifesavers Foundation, an organization which is a nonprofit devoted to rescuing underserved children and families dealing with poverty. Also has a pro-life element with it as well, with a mobile sonogram, and has a medical unit called the Doctor Spot. And we have lots of information about that on our website. You can simply go to lifesaversfoundation.org. But also, I encourage you to listen to the conversation we're going to have now with Judy Mow, who is actually the board chair of Lifesavers Foundation, an individual that also has served on the board of the Downtown Pregnancy Center in Dallas, and joins me now by phone. So, Jody, thank you so very much for joining us here for a few minutes.
Thank you, Kerby. Appreciate the opportunity so much.
Looking forward to meeting you face-to-face and hearing more about Lifesavers. And since I was curious about this, I know our audience would be as well. But give us a little bit of the history and the genesis of this, because I know that you and a number of other women actually formed Lifesavers Foundation, and I began to hear about it from some of my friends, and wanted everybody in our listening audience to hear about it today. So give us a little bit of the history.
Wonderful. Well, we had a group of determined women who have had some kind of a crisis around the abortion issue, realized that there was not any resources for single moms or single pregnant moms. And we formed in 2002 a group called the Lifesavers Foundation. And our first project was a resale store called Lifesavers Upscale Resale. It's in Richardson. And what we do is we have established partnerships with local pregnancy centers, other nonprofits that we can serve their clientele. They may not have a clothes closet. They might not have any resources for their clients, but we provide that through the sales and donations at our upscale resale store. We provide diapers for single moms who choose life for over a year, portable cribs, car seats, clothing, maternity wear, and also other items to set up a household for women coming out of the sex trade and who are trying to figure out how to do life in a crisis situation. So we have just this year provided direct help to over almost 1,500 clients, 56% increase over the last year, and, over $25,000 worth of car seats, $10,000 in diapers. I mean, that's a lot. So since the stores opened, we've provided over $1 million worth of merchandise
Very
to
impressive.
thousands of families.
Yes. Let's, if we can, talk about
then,
those women that you're serving, because in some respects, this are those that are very underserved and have just incredible needs that I would imagine most of our listeners in the audience probably have never even thought about.
Exactly. And, we decided our next project would be mobile. So we partnered up with a local pregnancy center. We provided women with free pregnancy tests, sonograms. And, everybody's got a truck now. But we were the first mobile sonogram unit in the Dallas area. And we go just randomly. People generally don't make appointments, but they go for a free sono. And women in need, it's convenient, it's missional, right? So we have a holistic view of the pro-life world. We're not a political action committee. We are a service organization being the hands and feet of Jesus. We are a mobile medical mission. And then out of that, we always in the pro-life world get this complaints, well, you don't care about the woman, all you care about is this, fetus that isn't really even a baby and so forth. But so we determined from there to go into a free medical care for children, pretty much providing all care, including prescriptions and, x-rays and all that for children 0 to 18. And we're going on our 4th year now with the Doctor Spot. We're out there. We've been accepted into 3 major school districts, Dallas, Mesquite, and Garland. It's incredible that we as a faith-based organization are welcomed onto these public school districts. And also the Dallas Police Department, we have really worked to, build relationships with all kinds of people in the Dallas area. And so we can serve these kids and their parents who are underserved, may have no insurance. And of course, many are refugees. We don't ask for papers. We don't, we're not, again, trying to build a wall or figure out any of that stuff out, but we are trying to serve the people that are here and who are scared and have no medical care. So we're grateful. Dallas is an extremely generous city, and that's the reason we've been able to stay in business for these over 3 years now.
I might just mention, if you'd like to know a little bit more, you can go to our website, pointofview.net, or just simply go to lifesaversfoundation.org. We have that link there as well, and you can find out more about that. I might just mention that there is a banquet Sunday night. I'll be there with my wife, and I would encourage you to find out more. And even if you can't attend the banquet, which I would imagine most of you have already had plans for the weekend, you could still find out about this organization and talk about how you could rescue people that find themselves in crisis. And we're going to a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about some of the various ministries that exist under Lifesavers Foundation. But it, if nothing else, puts a lie to this argument that I've heard from time to time, more on a college campus than even on this show, that say, well, you pro-lifers, you only care about the fetus. You only care about the baby. You don't care about the mom. Here's a good example of wanting to take the issue of life all the way from conception into those early years when individuals sometimes are not being treated or actually providing services that they desperately need. And as we've always talked about, including the conversation we had yesterday when it related to the whole issue of the prison system, I think the faith-based organizations, all by definition, can do a better job of addressing many of these needs than a government institution, which can only throw money at it. These sometimes are needs that are psychological, social, and spiritual. And by definition, those are not the kinds of things that the federal government or the state government can address, but those are the kind of things that motivated Christians and churches can do. So if you're not familiar with Lifesavers Foundation, let me encourage you to go to lifesaversfoundation.org. When we come back, we're going to spend a little more time talking with Jody about various ways you can get involved, because I hope that you or your church might get involved. Hope you have also maybe a child or a grandchild that is looking for a service project. There's another way that they can get involved. So we're going to talk about all those opportunities right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You may have heard the term cultural appropriation, but I've also found that many of our listeners were unfamiliar with the term and how it is used to criticize anyone who is not deemed to be politically correct. The online cultural appropriation police were in full view recently when a young woman decided to wear a traditional Chinese dress to her school prom. Since Kezia Dom is not Asian, this infuriated people on social media when she posted a picture of her in her dress. She thought it was beautiful. Social justice warriors saw it as bigoted and a clear example of cultural appropriation. The term cultural appropriation has been used in sociology to explain how a majority culture borrows or adapts from a minority culture some custom, fashion, or cuisine. In the past, it was a descriptive phrase. Now it has become a proscriptive phrase used to punish anyone who appropriates something from another culture. Sometimes these accusations get very confusing. Vogue, for example, was accused of cultural appropriation when it featured manicure sculptures of white women with long nails. The criticism was that black women can wear long adorned nails because that belongs to black culture. But others pointed out that long adorned nails go all the way back to the upper class women in the Ming Dynasty. They were a sign that you were too rich and powerful to do any manual labor. Should Vogue apologize to African American women or the descendants from ancient China? It all gets very confusing. Perhaps it is time to remind these critics that the meals we eat and the clothes we wear are usually the byproduct of centuries of cultural appropriation. Let's leave this young girl alone and focus on things that really are bigoted and offensive. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation for a few more minutes as we talk about Lifesavers Foundation. I do encourage you to find out more about that organization, and you can get involved as an individual. I would also maybe encourage you to think about getting your Sunday school class, your Bible fellowship, maybe your church involved. And also, as I mentioned just a minute ago, if young people are looking for volunteer opportunities, I suspect there would be some of those available as well. Judy Mow is, again, on the board, actually the board chair of Lifesavers Foundation. In the past was the board chair, actually on the board of the Downtown Pregnancy Center. And I see, Jody, that this really is a very natural continuation of what is happening at pregnancy centers all over the country, because oftentimes it isn't just trying to save the baby and save the mother, but then once the mother decides to keep the child, there are all sorts of other questions she immediately runs into. And by expanding this to reach others who maybe didn't even come through a pregnancy center, you're really reaching an underserved part of our population. And again, we can be the hands and feet of Jesus.
Absolutely. We believe that, pro-life is pro-woman. And we want to not just, save the baby, but save the mama as well. And we now can provide medical care for the mother as well as the child on the doctor's spot. We have a family nurse practitioner, and that makes that possible. So we are thrilled. Of course, we can't do everything, right? But we do partner with many other nonprofits to provide services for these gals who are, pretty much in a crisis. And of course, there's many, many things that can be done. $50 is a pack and play for a single mom. $25 is 25 pregnancy tests. We also see on the doctor's spot a lot of homeless teens at some of these alternative schools. And we would love to have some church to volunteer to follow up with some of our clients if they, we have to be careful with HIPAA and all, but if they would like a follow-up, wouldn't that be awesome if we could figure out a way to follow up with some of these kids and provide even more services? We see drug-addicted children.
Yes.
We also watch out carefully for trafficking. We're seeing sometimes parents show up and they don't know this kid's name. And, of course, they certainly don't have their birth date and all this stuff. So we're having to really be careful and watch for signs of trafficking. Many of our clients on board the Doctor Spot, are first time in the country.
Yes.
And they don't have their immunization records and so forth. So we are really trying to be a first responder for them. DISD is expecting, when we worked with their back to school fair, they were expecting 1,000 new families. That's just in DISD alone that week to the country, 1,000. So, if we can see 50 a day, that's amazing. So, yes, there's lots and lots of ways to help. Of course, you can go to our website and donate. You can bring a big box of diapers to the resale store for a single mom. If they are working with a pregnancy center, they can come in and get free diapers for a full year, not just one package of diapers, right? So, and then also, of course, we refer to any local pregnancy center who's near them so they can get further help, counseling, parental counseling, marriage counseling, all kinds of things. And then, of course, we'd like to connect them with a church where they could be discipled and just get connected to the family of God.
Let me just mention there are a lot of ways to connect up, and of course we've already posted on our website, lifesaversfoundation.org. Of course, one of the events, of course, is Sunday night. You have, of course, former Congressman from South Carolina, Trey Gowdy, has been on the program with us, and the host is Mark Davis. And in the past, you've had Newt Gingrich, you've had Jason Witten, you've had all sorts of individuals. But if people want to participate, of course, there is that event. But even if they can't come to a banquet, they can certainly go to the resale store, which is in Richardson, Texas. But talk about all the other ways they can participate, because I think that one of the things I found about pregnancy resource centers, and I'm probably sure with Lifesavers Foundation, overworked, underfunded, and in need of any kind of volunteer help that you can get. So talk about the ways in which we can get some people that are listening right now motivated to help you out.
That is awesome. Yes, of course, we can always use volunteers at the resale store. We can use stuff. If you have furniture, clothing, gently used kids' things, any kind of household goods, we would love to have it donated at the resale store. If you don't know of a good place where the profits from that store are going to really help someone, that's what we do. We need a used truck. Our truck is sad. We're renting a truck right now. So we'd love to have a delivery truck. Of course, we would love to have your teens who need service hours, as Kerby was just saying, come and help us on a Saturday or any day, sort through dust, clean the windows, and maybe do some Instagram posts for you social media gurus. We'd love to figure out some outfits and post on Instagram. We do have some awesome clothing and things donated, so we'd love to get that out on social media. You can go online, donate $100, $5, $25, $10,000. We'd love it. And of course, we are. If you would like to volunteer on the mobilesonogram.com unit, that will be available after the first of the year. And that does require some training, but if you want to be on the front lines of ministry and sharing the gospel, that is where you need to volunteer. We have to be really careful with the Doctor Spot because it's under HIPAA rules, and
Sure.
So we can only have volunteers outside the unit, maybe giving out water or a granola bar. Many of our health fairs, we desperately need help. We always participate in the Operation Care Christmas party for the homeless and the poor. This year it will be on December 21st down at the Convention Center. We need volunteers for that, especially who are bilingual. So if you would like to volunteer that day, they're expecting, we don't even know how many, but many of our health fairs, we always need volunteers. So
for sure.
you can go online and look for volunteer opportunities, and you can also email us through the website.
Again, when you're talking about the need, 1 in 3 children in Dallas live in poverty. And at least on your website, talking about since its inception, Lifesavers Foundation has assisted over 15,000 clients through the voucher system of the resale store, $750,000 worth of merchandise to needy single parents, provided sonograms and pregnancy tests to over 6,000 clients. The list goes on, meals and all sorts of other things. So if you're saying, well, I would like to have some kind of ministry and I don't know how to get started, I know they can plug you in. And that is a way in which you can actually begin to get yourself involved, get your family involved, get your church involved, get your young people involved in some kind of project. And again, just wanted to mention that the banquet is, of course, this Sunday, November 3rd. But whether you can go there or not, you can go to lifesaversfoundation.org. And Jody, I know you've been very busy, but I thank you for giving us just a few minutes today to educate our listeners about an organization they need to know more about. So thank you for giving us an update. And as we continue to learn more about this organization, you have various events. I hope you're calling us so we can promote it to our listening audience.
Thank you so much, Kerby. God bless you.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into some of the issues in the news. But again, one of the reasons I like to feature these organizations, as I have said before, and I think we made the case yesterday, when we were just talking about prison ministries, that faith-based organizations are actually superior so many times to government programs. And whether it's drug counseling and rehabilitation, whether it's the conversation we had yesterday about prisons and recidivism and the kind of biblical training that takes place inside prison walls and those kinds of things, or whether it's the outreach of these pregnancy centers around the country, or a group like Lifesavers Foundation reaching out to not only those in need for pregnancy tests and counseling and concern, but also for all sorts of other very significant needs. I hope that you'll take the time to find out a little bit more. And all of that is available at our website, pointofview.net. When we come back, we'll also spend some time looking at a couple of the issues in the news. As a matter of fact, some of those issues in the news, including the commentary that Penna Dexter has posted today, started out as a Texas story and became a national story. It's amazing how many times that has taken place. You think of Amber Geiger accidentally shooting Botham Jean, and then the brother actually deciding to say, "I forgive you," and hug her. And that was originally a local story that became a national story. This one on transgender is, again, a local story that's become national. So there are just more and more of those kinds of stories developing. And then we'll get into questions like the impeachment, whether or not Donald Trump will be impeached and what is happening and which rules are being followed. We'll get into this smear campaign of this very qualified lawyer that would be put on the federal bench. So we have a lot to cover, and we will do so right after this.
When you give to Point of View, does it make a difference? Jeremy Dyes would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kerby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Penna Dexter and Kerby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. And that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the Truth Team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, and a little bit later I'm going to be joined by Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. Mark that on your calendar. First time in a long time. All three of us have been in the same room at the same time. Of course, I've been traveling for a little bit of time, but even before that, Kelly and Penna had different activities that called them away, so it will be fun to have the three of us in the same room at the same time. And just saw Kelly a minute ago. He's meeting with some other people, another part of the building. But I thought while we were talking about this idea of Lifesavers Foundation, I've alluded to a couple of times my commentary that came out yesterday. So let me just mention that in case you did not see it, because it was based on this book by criminologist at Baylor University, Byron Johnson, called More God, Less Crime. That's what I called my commentary, because first of all, he explains in one part of the book why there are a number of scientists and criminologists that don't really want to look at the connection between faith and the impact that it could have on crime. Well, that's due perhaps to bias. It might be to the fact that a faith-based organization isn't seen as legitimate. I don't know what it is, but the bottom line is he called it, one of his chapters, The Last Acceptable Prejudice. But I think for anybody with an open mind, with clear eyes, will see something very clearly, and that is faith-based organizations just routinely outdo and outperform government institutions, and the reason for it is pretty obvious. Take crime, take welfare issues, take even this issue of pregnancy and food and all sorts of other things. Many times problems that individuals have are not economic. Yes, economics is part of it. They don't have enough money to spend on food, or they don't have enough money so they go to a life of crime. Yes, I get that. But oftentimes the underlying issues are social, cultural, psychological, and spiritual. Ding, 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 ding. Oh, those kinds of issues that by definition a federal government, a state government, a local government cannot really address. But Christian organizations can. And yesterday I talked about the impact that, for example, various ministries like Bill Glass, Prison Fellowship, Kairos Prison Ministry, and others are having. The impact that chaplains have in the prison system. The impact that these various programs that have been developed so that a individual in prison can actually get a Bible school education. Some of them are getting seminary level education and those kinds of things. And then all sorts of other examples. Byron Johnson talks about the so-called Boston Miracle, where police and pastors work together to break kind of the stranglehold of gangs in the community. And then the mission of the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise, violence-free zones, on and on and on. So anyway, the bottom line is yesterday I spent some time talking about how that would be and has been effective when we talk about more God, less crime. I've already mentioned in passing, of course, when you look at drug rehabilitation, oftentimes faith-based drug rehabilitation centers are much more effective than your standard ones because, things like the Holy Spirit, accountability, the gospel, always are the case. Which brings me to a commentary that I've written. I haven't recorded it yet, so it's not going to come out for at least another week or so. But it was on the idea of, should we still provide a tax-exempt status to various religious organizations? Because, as you well know, there's at least one presidential candidate that argued that if indeed you don't agree with me, then no reward, no benefit, no tax break. And my argument was, as easy as it was to set that aside, you find hardly anybody saying, yeah, we need to remove the tax-exempt status of churches and Christian organizations. But I've said, let's have that debate. Because I think what would happen is, if we really had an ongoing debate about what is actually taking place, Americans would be shocked. Just take this number and work it out to its logical extension. We have, in round numbers, about 350,000 religious congregations in this country. Then you have all sorts of various religious groups and community groups, like one that we just talked about a minute ago, Lifesavers Foundation, many of these pregnancy centers and all the rest. One survey done with pretty kind of narrow and conservative estimates still said that the economic impact of faith in America is on the order of $1.2 trillion each year. But that's pales in comparison when you come back and ask a different question. What if all these different organizations actually didn't exist? Then what would the federal, state, and local governments have to pay in additional social service resources? And the best estimate that came from Byron Johnson's colleague, Rodney Stark at Baylor University, using, I think, reasonable assumptions, are the federal government would have to spend an additional $2.67 trillion every year to cover all the social services provided by churches and Christian organizations. That's a lot. $2.67 trillion every single year. Because we're talking about soup kitchens, we're talking about drug counseling, we're talking about outreaches of all sorts that exist. We're talking about pregnancy centers, we're talking about various kinds of volunteer programs, we're talking about mentoring programs. I mean, you go down this list and you realize that number probably is too low. But another way to look at it is to go to a thought experiment that was proposed a couple of years ago, and that was, imagine if all the Christian institutions in America went on strike. They won't. It's just a thought experiment, so don't worry about it. It's not a threat or anything. But imagine what would happen if all these Christian organizations went on strike. Imagine if Catholic hospitals, Presbyterian hospitals, Methodist hospitals, Baptist hospitals closed down for a while. Imagine the load on the public schools if there were no more Christian schools in operation. Imagine the strain in government if soup kitchens and outreaches to the poor no longer existed. And the list goes on and on and on. So this is one of those times where, you know, I appreciate the fact that Beto O'Rourke thought maybe we should reevaluate tax exemption. I'm saying, fine, let's put it on the table. Let's just talk about all the good these Christian organizations do, and you want to remove the tax-exempt status for some of those if they don't agree with your view on, say, marriage. Well, I know most people are not going to agree with that, but I'd love to have that conversation because I think even the secular-minded people in America would be shocked to realize how much these Christian organizations that they hate, that they vilify, that they marginalize, are actually doing a great deal of good. Which brings me to another commentary I've got coming out in the future, and that is one of the most incredible speeches given a while back was by the Attorney General, William Barr. And in a normal world, you would have heard about that speech, but this is not a normal world. But he actually gave a very powerful speech at Notre Dame, trying to remind the audience of the importance of religious organizations. And he actually said that the founders referred to that as the supreme test as a free society. It was whether the citizens in such a free society could maintain the moral discipline and virtue necessary for the survival of free institutions. And he said that if we fail the test, we're only going one of two ways. Either we embark on unbridled pursuit of personal appetites at the expense of common good. In other words, we just get anarchy. Everybody just does what they think is right in their own eyes, and you just have total social anarchy. Or else coercive government has to step in to impose restraints. And so he says, well, we really don't want to go down either of those roads. We don't want more government telling us what to do day to day, and we certainly don't want anarchy in the streets. So what's the solution? How do we get virtue and moral restraint? And his argument is religion. He said religion helps train, teach, and habituate people to what is good. And it comes in various forms, from formal religious training to informal rules like customs and traditions. But of course, he points out there's a real problem because, as we'll talk about in just a minute with Kelly Shackelford, religion isn't very popular these days in our secular culture. In fact, it's very unpopular. And those who defy the secular creed of the day, he says, risk a figurative burning at the stake, social, educational, and professional ostracism, and exclusion waged through lawsuits and savage media campaigns. So, you know, you think about how that is played out. I mean, if you've been listening to this program any length of time, you recognize what happens if you're unpopular. You could be a baker, you could be a florist, you could be a videographer, you could be a photographer, you could be a teacher, you could be a student, and you face a fair amount of criticism and persecution. And so we've oftentimes spent our time talking with people like Kelly Shackelford about that. But William Barr understands that if we really want to have a flourishing culture, then religion is really important in that regard. So I just thought I'd point that out, that even as we talk about one group like we did earlier this hour, Lifesavers, it just represents one of hundreds of thousands of organizations. And, of course, there's 350,000 religious congregations. Most are churches, but some are also synagogues, mosques, and a variety of others. And they all provide a very significant service. So for one candidate to just cavalierly say, well, we're just going to pull the tax-exempt status from anybody that doesn't agree with me politically, fails to understand the tremendous social service provided by these organizations. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover here on Weekend Edition. All that coming up right after this.
Last February, in a one-hour radio interview, Jeff Younger told me the story of his battle to save his then 6-year-old son, James. When James was 3, his mother, Jeff's ex-wife, began dressing and treating him as a girl. She began taking him to a transgender-affirming therapist, and she obtained a court order enjoining Jeff from dressing James as a boy for school, from teaching him that he is a boy, and from providing religious teachings about sexuality and gender. She has even dressed James as a little drag queen for FaceTime communications with his dad. James' mother instructed school authorities that he be treated as a girl. He arrives at school dressed as a girl and obediently answers to his girl name, Luna. But when James is with his dad and twin brother Jude, he's all boy. When he's with family friends, he plays with the boys as a boy. In fact, one dad in whose home James plays says he vehemently refuses toys, games, and clothing that could be even the slightest bit feminine. This little boy, now age 7, is being socially transitioned to become a trans female, a process being orchestrated by his mother, a pediatrician. To stop this, Jeff has been attempting to get more custodial authority over James and Jude. Last week, a judge granted Jeff some authority for medical decisions. Jeff is desperate to prevent James from being subjected to the first step in a medical transition, which can occur as early as age 8 with puberty-blocking medication. Surgical castration and hormones for life are the next steps. Amazingly, some doctors provide this unethical treatment. This is child abuse. James' story has finally gotten the attention of the Texas governor and attorney general. Hopefully, they will take strong action and recommend legislation to protect James and other children who are victims of this destructive agenda and some really bad parenting. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, and of course we are in the midst of our weekend edition, but decided to have Kelly Shackelford and Penna Dexter join me before we start our national hour. And one of the things I thought would be fun to talk about is, since most of our listeners are still Texas listeners, it's amazing to me the number of Texas stories that have become national stories. You can think, of course, of Amber Geiger and shooting accidentally Botham Jean, and then this brother actually going and saying, "I forgive you," and hugging, and that became a national story. Yesterday, we were talking with Todd Starnes, and he brings up the story you talked about 2 days ago in Austin, the school board issue there. But one of the commentaries I might just think is, Penna, we have your Saving James, and that's the story you did the interview on. and now everybody around the country is talking about it. So give us a little bit of background, if you might.
Well, it's the story of James Younger and Jeff Younger, his dad. And James is a twin. He's got a twin brother, Jude. Jeff and his wife, Ann Georgelas, are divorced. I think they divorced a few years after the boys were born. And at 3 years old, Ann determined that James was more of a girl than a boy. And she has been treating him as such ever since. He's 7 years old now, including giving him a different name, Luna, for school and for when he's with her. But when he's with Dad and with other friends of the family, he's completely all boy. He prefers that. So it just feels, she is really the bad actor, I think, in this situation. And but the dad was he didn't have rights for medical decisions, and he had very little time with the boys. And there was a study done of the home, and there was finally a jury that looked at this, and they sided with the mother. Basically, they did not give the dad what he was asking for, which was full conservatorship over the boys. But a judge came in and said the dad needs to have some say in medical decisions. So now, going forward, I think it's still much more weighted toward the mother. But, he's 7. When you're 8 or 9 or so, you can start, if you're inclined toward changing your gender, on puberty blocking drugs. And that's where this little boy is headed if the mother has her way. And so the reason it's become a national story is because it's a heart-rending parental rights and, parental split story. But it's a story that it just shows us how crazy our culture has become with regard to this issue of transgender. And if we don't pull back on it, there's going to be abuse of children, which is really already happening. And this is definitely child abuse. Because what happens to these kids after puberty blocking is then they really do start to become, desirous of the other sex. And then you start with hormones. And then if they choose at about 18, surgery, which removes a body part and basically builds other body parts. And it's really mutilation of the child. So this has become a big story. People are talking about it now all over the country. And the good news, I think, with regard to the decision that happened a couple of weeks ago, is it got the attention of Texas leaders, the governor, Greg Abbott,
Sure.
and the lieutenant governor, and also Ken Paxton,
Right.
attorney general. So, and then last week we had a congressman, Chip Roy from Texas, on because he really got concerned about it.
Yes.
And so now maybe even at the national level, they'll start dealing with this issue of parents. These ridiculous, horrible. These are horrible. This is terrible parenting.
Yeah, I mean, look, it shows how backwards we've gotten. Okay, and this is not some crazy left wing state. This is Texas that this happened in. It shows you how bizarre things. But I think most Americans, and I don't mean 60%, I mean like 90%. But I mean we'd have to see, but would say that you're wanting to do what to this 7-year-old child? And they would say, that is child abuse. You should lose custody of your child. Instead, you had a jury give all of this to the person who was abusing her child until the judge finally at least stepped in and said, well, in the medical decisions, there needs to be a joint decision where they have to come together. Thank goodness. And here's the extra thing that Penna didn't mention. The woman who's doing this to her child or would like to is a pediatrician.
Yes.
I mean,
this is really odd.
I'm
Every
like,
part of this is odd.
I was just wondering. I was like, is she going to lose half of her clients? I mean, anybody who reads the newspaper and goes, "You're doing what?"
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine taking your child there because I mean, again, I think most Americans know this is child abuse. To take a child because you have some you know what it reminds me about is what we used to call Munchausen by proxy, right? This whole idea. I mean, that's really somewhat what this is. It's somebody said, they made a joke. They said a vegetarian cat. When you have a vegetarian cat, you know that the decision is not being made by the cat.
By the cat.
And I think that's what we have here. I don't think anybody thinks the 7-year-old boy is making this decision, and so it's abusive.
Yeah.
Well, as far as the pediatric community goes, there is a sector of it that's actually pushing this type of thing. I interviewed a few months ago, it was in conjunction with the James Younger story, Michelle Cretella, who heads up an organization of pediatricians that's on the common sense side of things. But there are other organizations of pediatricians who are pushing their members to do this. And as a matter of fact, if you don't affirm a child's some little tendency, they play with girl toys or they like to wear a dress when they're little, if they're a boy. If you don't affirm that, then they censor you, they punish you. So within the pediatric community, also within the psychology community, there are people who are pushing the transgender agenda, and they're actually punishing their members. So that's another thing that has to be stopped. That this fear factor in the medical community that you're going to violate some woke concept of validating, how many of us have seen little kids that have played with a toy of the opposite sex? That doesn't mean
How many
anything.
tomboy girls have there been that,
Yes.
Later they're the most feminine, female.
Mm-hmm.
I bet we'd have listeners, call in and it would just flood the lines,
Yeah.
And the idea that because this little girl's a tomboy, you would actually totally engage in the type of, it's almost like a horror story to me of what they would do to these children.
It's awful.
Yeah, and so, I just think everybody I think everybody is kind of being told to kind of, or at least encouraged to just be quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is
can't.
No, we can't. Everybody needs to speak up because, these children can't speak for themselves. I've heard there's a lot of these horror stories, and it's to speak up.
Very good. Well, if nothing else, let's give high marks to Penna Dexter doing the first interview back in February. A lot of our listeners would know about this from point of view rather than something else, and just a good example of some of the kinds of things.
A friend of mine knew Jeff Younger.
Yeah.
He's a Christian.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine how frustrating it's been for him. He was, by court order, not allowed to try to convince his little boy that he's a boy.
But you did that interview. And, of course, we've talked about Dr. Paul McHugh, who used to be, of course, at Johns Hopkins, who has documented very clearly that there is a high percentage of what's called transgender regret. And a lot of young people that are kind of confused when they're in medical school by the time they've graduated from high school kind of figure all that out. One of the articles we posted here, we'll get to a little bit later in the National Hour, Transgender Cult. It's pretty awful. And so that's one of the things we'll be talking about. We come back, I want to talk about the jobs report, want to talk about impeachment, want to talk about one of the worst smear campaigns I've seen since Robert Bork. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of things we're going to be talking about. So, again, if you want to find out some more, including Penna Dexter's commentary, which is entitled Saving James, it's on our website already, and we'll take a break. And when we come back, we'll continue our conversation, actually begin it with Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford. First time all three of us have been in the room for the same time, so it'll be fun. I'm looking forward to it, and we'll be back right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. They're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us. It is Weekend Edition, and Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, Kerby Anderson in the same room at the same time. Mark your calendar. It has been a long time since that has happened, and so we have a lot to talk about. Let me just mention real quickly, because they're not going to spend a lot of time on it. I always like to give the jobs report when it comes out, and a record 158 million Americans are now working, the 23rd such record since President Donald Trump took office. The economy in October added 128,000 jobs, higher than what economists expected, given the General Motors strike, and something I mentioned yesterday, because the trade war, as we mentioned yesterday, Adam Smith's revenge, the growth rate has dropped, which people understood would take place, but nevertheless, 128,000 new jobs. Unemployment rate set a record 50-year low, 3.5%. I remember my economics class said it could never go below 4 or 5%, and it did. There it is. And unemployment rate for Black Americans has never been this low. I could go on and on and on, but pretty good economic news. What do you think, Penna Dexter?
Pretty good statistics to run on, I would say, barring any unforeseen developments.
That's the thing. Usually this is what we'd be talking about. Everybody would be talking about the economy and the next race, and instead we're talking about the most nutty stuff, and we're not even, the people don't even know what's happening with, the economy and how things are turning around. So it's really bizarre. I think that's going to be one of his main challenges is can he be disciplined enough to stay on message, because sometimes Trump reminds you of the what is it, the dog in, was it Up? Squirrel.
Yeah, squirrel.
And it just can so be easily distracted if somebody attacks him, where you should just be talking about the facts.
Yes.
And these are really good facts for Americans.
It's the media, too, because every day Trump does something, at least something.
Picture of a dog getting a Congressional Medal of Honor or something like that.
Yeah, so
that's
that's basically for the country, something that we like. I mean, we'll talk about some of that today, but we don't really hear about it. We hear about this supposedly, quote-unquote, impeachable action of his that nobody could really say is impeachable, and yet they're trying to impeach him about it.
Well, we will talk about the impeachment regulations. We talked yesterday about the vote. We're going to talk about the borking of an individual, Lawrence Van Dyke. We'll talk about persecuted Christians a little bit later. Matter of fact, under Penna Dexter's bio, there's an article by Steve Stockman, and then also, of course, Penna's commentary today, Saving James, which gets us into another topic later on. We'll talk about the transgender issue. And Elizabeth Warren says we probably can spend $52 trillion on Medicare for all, but there will be no middle-class tax increase. Funded by rainbows and unicorns. That's what the Wall Street Journal says. You can imagine what's going to go on there.
That's scary. That's scary. Yeah, and one of the things when we talked about impeachment, we talk about up front here, the perspective and what the media is focusing on. I think, I think a great example of this is the poll. Washington Post, of course, is leading the attack on the president from day one on impeachment. And they got this poll, and this is what you hear like on the news and everywhere else, is Americans are evenly split on impeaching the president. But if you look at the poll, what you find is that all the Democrats who didn't want him elected are the ones who want him impeached, and all the Republicans who wanted him to be the president don't want him impeached. But here's the thing they don't focus on: the independents. 82% say they're against impeachment. That's pretty big. I mean, basically what you've got is the same people that didn't want him elected still don't want him elected. And so it's really not any big news from what they're showing so far. The big news should be 82% of the independents are saying they're against this. They are maybe going off the cliff here because this could have great impact on the election. But you don't see that in any of the headlines. You have to look at the poll and to see, oh my gosh, okay, the Republicans are all voting this, are all saying this, and the Democrats are all saying this, but the independents, 82%. That is a huge number. So,
it was very interesting. I thought that 2 Democrats did not vote for this in the House. They're a Democrat, one's from Minnesota, one's from New Jersey, and they're from districts that Trump carried. And so, I mean, to me, that says a lot. And when it gets to the Senate, I thought McConnell sort of signaled that he wasn't going to take a long time with this. I felt like he made that speech right before, and it feels that way. And I think that would be wise for them just to, let's have a vote and just move on with it.
Well, this, a lot of this doesn't make sense if you're really trying to impeach and convict somebody, which makes, I think, it fairly obvious that that's not their goal. Because in order to, is it 20 Republicans in the Senate would have to flip sides and go against? I mean, nobody thinks that's going to happen. And even if that was your goal, you would create a bipartisan process in the House. But instead, it's this bizarre process. It's not bipartisan at all. The vote is, every Republican voted one way and every Democrat except for the 2 voted the other way. That's as partisan as you get. And then to not allow, again, in the past, it's always been the same rules under Nixon, under Clinton, right. Is, the minority side gets to call witnesses and the president's counsel there, and you cross-examine people, and it's all out in public. And because you can't win if you don't have bipartisan votes because it takes 2/3 to convict. Well, they're not doing any of that here. It's like, oh, yeah, you can call witnesses as long as the prosecutor agrees with your witness.
Right, yeah.
I'm like, how would anybody like to be prosecuted under that approach? And, oh, yeah, we're going to have a lot of these in secret, and then we're going to leak the stuff we want to leak. I mean, this is not an attempt to get a conviction. This is an attempt. Either that or they're really, really stupid. I don't think they're that dumb. This is we're not trying to get a conviction of an impeachment. We're trying to use impeachment to smear somebody, and that's why we're doing things not the way we've always done impeachment. And it goes back. There's I don't know if you've seen the de Tocqueville quote on this. It's really kind of eerie when you go back and look at de Tocqueville's, famous book that, was it For America or
Alexis de Tocqueville? Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I forget the name. I think it's Democracy or
Democracy in America.
Yeah, Democracy in America.
Couldn't come up with it.
He's got This is 1835. He wrote this, and I'm not looking at the quote. We can pull it out later, but he basically says, when this country ever loses its morality, you will begin to see impeachment used as a weapon to attack your political opponents. And you're looking at that going, oh my gosh. I mean, we're there. I mean, impeachment's like the death penalty of politics. It's like you pull it out when there's a high crime, when the president is engaging in treason or something at that level. But de Tocqueville predicted that when we lose our moral compass in this country, you will see the Americans start to use impeachment just to try to smear your opponent. And that's what we're watching right now.
Democracy in America, Alexis de Tocqueville. Let me just mention another hard name to say, Hans von Spassky. That first article is the one that talks about some of the rules, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But I got to get Kelly's comments about what looks like the worst smear campaign since Judge Robert Bork. That's saying something, against an individual, Lawrence Van Dyke. So we're going to talk about that because you need to know about some of these qualified justices that are getting smeared by, of all things, the American Bar Association. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You may have heard the term cultural appropriation, but I've also found that many of our listeners were unfamiliar with the term and how it is used to criticize anyone who is not deemed to be politically correct. The online cultural appropriation police were in full view recently when a young woman decided to wear a traditional Chinese dress to her school prom. Since Kezia Dom is not Asian, this infuriated people on social media when she posted a picture of her in her dress. She thought it was beautiful. Social justice warriors saw it as bigoted and a clear example of cultural appropriation. The term cultural appropriation has been used in sociology to explain how a majority culture borrows or adapts from a minority culture some custom, fashion, or cuisine. In the past, it was a descriptive phrase. Now it has become a proscriptive phrase used to punish anyone who appropriates something from another culture. Sometimes these accusations get very confusing. Vogue, for example, was accused of cultural appropriation when it featured manicure sculptures of white women with long nails. The criticism was that black women can wear long adorned nails because that belongs to black culture. But others pointed out that long adorned nails go all the way back to the upper class women in the Ming Dynasty. They were a sign that you were too rich and powerful to do any manual labor. Should Vogue apologize to African American women or the descendants from ancient China? It all gets very confusing. Perhaps it is time to remind these critics that the meals we eat and the clothes we wear are usually the byproduct of centuries of cultural appropriation. Let's leave this young girl alone and focus on things that really are bigoted and offensive. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, it is Weekend Edition. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. There are a couple of articles we've posted here. One that deals with this attack on Lawrence Van Dyke. I'll read from another one that was in the Wall Street Journal, since Penna and I tend to read there as well. And he is a nominee to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, has credentials that most people say people would envy. An individual that has served as Solicitor General, individual that, of course, has actually clerked under Judge Janice Rogers Brown, and an individual that, of course, was graduating magna cum laude from Harvard Law School, edited the Law Review, and is in the Justice Department. But nevertheless, Kelly, you got to explain this. The American Bar Association, supposed to be so objective, said, Penna, what does it say? Arrogant, lazy, and ideologue?
Yeah, doesn't have an open mind. Really nasty. And so the Wall Street Journal called it a mess of anonymous personal attacks and innuendo. And it was.
Now, the people doing the research, Kelly, I understand they talk to you. Tell us more.
Yeah, they interview. Now, again, the American Bar Association, unfortunately, in the past used to be an organization that, lawyers just joined of all different stripes. But it's become a just completely left-wing, really political group. And there were a number of senators who, this is sort of the last straw for a number of senators. I know Mike Lee, a number of others said they should not be allowed to, they should be given nothing, because they're given a little bit of a preference to review people, and they work with them. And there are senators now, Republican senators, who say really that should stop because of things like this. They're supposed to give a neutral evaluation, and they are not neutral at all. Like, for instance, they've gone after a couple of the president's nominees because they didn't have, I think it's 12 years of experience as a lawyer, like in court or whatever. And then you go, wait a second, Elena Kagan never
Not
did
one
that.
day.
Yeah, that wasn't a problem, So they've got a problem here. But this one is so bad because, number one, Lawrence Van Dyke is the nominee for the Ninth Circuit. Okay, and that's Rush Limbaugh calls it the Ninth Circus, right? It's considered the most liberal in the country, that circuit, and you see all the lawsuits against the Trump administration being filed in the Ninth Circuit. Yeah. It's in San Francisco,
but it's getting closer and closer to
he's
tipping.
Flipping it, yeah.
And that's probably part of this.
The president is changing it. I think it was 29. I mean, it was 19-10 when he started. 19 Democrat appointee, 10 and now we're basically getting down to where it's going to be 16-13. But Lawrence Van Dyke is appointed for the Ninth Circuit, but he's just not appointed. He's a conservative guy. Okay, he was in Montana and Nevada. He was gun rights. He was all those things as an individual, strong Christian, all these things. And so, boy, they didn't want him. And so, but instead of saying that they don't like him because of what his personal views are on those things, they had to smear him. I mean, he's brilliant. He was Solicitor General of 2 different states.
Yes.
Okay, as you showed, top of his class from Harvard Law School. His cases really are across the board. Like one of the cases we did with Lawrence at First Liberty was us and the ACLU together on the same side. It was a free speech case. Lawrence represented the ACLU. Okay, so don't tell me he's not for he's for the Constitution. Another case we had that we worked together on was involving a small African American church in Holly Springs, Mississippi, which ended up being a really big case for the rights of churches. He's represented all kinds of different backgrounds. And always done so, gleefully, and again, very, very bright guy. Well, I was called, Marcia Davenport, the head person who's supposed to be in charge of their objective committee, asked me a lot of questions. I told her tons of very positive things about Lawrence. I was never asked any negative concept and anything about Lawrence. Well, we've heard such and such. What's your experience with that? Never asked anything like that. So it comes out. Lawrence has his hearing. The night before his hearing, or maybe it was the day of morning before his hearing, at the last second they dropped this bomb where it's not based upon any evidence that they can point to. Just, we did all these interviews and we think he's unfair. And then the wording that they used, they said he admitted that he wouldn't be fair to like LGBT.
Yeah.
And
that's the article we posted here from, what was it, National Review. And he said, wait a minute, I never said that. And,
and he, at that point, when they kind of came after his character and everything else, it took him a while to gather because he was kind of beginning to weep, because what the next thing out of his mouth was, I believe every person is created in the image of God.
Right.
And so they were attacking, the thing the most important to his life, his faith and his standing for integrity. And so it was just a really horrible example. But to show how bad this is, the person in charge of his so-called objective review committee had donated to his political opponent in his last race when he run in Montana.
Yeah.
How can you possibly put that kind of person in charge? And one of the people she went to was his opponent.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you can get all kinds of smear statements and then not attribute them to anybody and come out and do this kind of an attack. So this is resulting not only in a backfire, but a backfire against not just the attack on Lawrence Van Dyke, but an attack on the American Bar Association. This is really harming them. And you're going to see, I think, a lot more in the press. But if people look right now, I know Hiram Sasser, our general counsel, was on Fox and Friends this morning, but this is really getting out there. And I think it could lead to the Senate saying we're done with the American Bar Association doing any sort of evaluation.
There was one senator, he's not a conservative, Sheldon Whitehouse.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
And he was pretty appalled by this. And he said that the ABA should be brought in to explain these descriptions that they made of Van Dyke, of Lawrence Van Dyke. And so, I mean, to me, that was interesting because he's usually very far to the left. And, the other thing this says to me, and Kelly, tell me if I'm wrong, but apparently
one of the states where he was Solicitor General. I guess he must have a dual residency, or he's lived in both states,
Right.
Nevada and Montana. But in Nevada, he supported the amendment that defined marriage as a man and a woman, and that was used against him. So then watch out if you protected marriage ever in your
That's right.
past, because you're in trouble.
That's what
in
this is all about,
confirmations.
right? It's if you have traditional Christian beliefs as an individual, no matter how you would rule as a judge, and he pointed out, it doesn't really matter what I believe personally. My job as a judge is just follow whatever the law says. But that's not what they want. They want to disqualify any person who believes in traditional biblical morality, and then to try to smear you. Again, everybody just saw this with Kavanaugh. They know what this is, and they want to keep him off the court. This should tell you Lawrence Van Dyke would be an excellent judge.
Of course.
And that he's very bright. He would be at the Ninth Circuit. Boy, what a change, right? I mean, Ninth Circuit, liberal crazy stuff to Lawrence Van Dyke, constitutionalist. So this is one of those things, if you want to go, if you're really a wonk, I think it'd be fun for anybody. Go back and watch the hearing. Senator Lee had some really strong statements. Senator Cruz. Senator Hawley was the one who sort of really went into this the most. Did a really good job. It's very revealing, and I think you can see. But you're probably going to see more on this, because I think the American bar really just kind of stepped in it a little bit, and I think they're in some big trouble, and they should be.
I might mention, too, that fourth article is by John McCormick, and it was one that was in National Review, but it also has a link there so you can actually watch a little bit of the emotion there where Josh Hawley was asking about that. The other one I was reading from is by Adam White, who it's interesting because he's actually been part of the ABA's administrative law section, and he said this aggressive politicization of the ABA is especially frustrating for someone like me, an active member of the ABA, more specifically of its administrative law section, as I mentioned, a well-respected institution that advances the study and development of law on a nonpartisan basis. But he says this is not the same ABA of my father. I'm paraphrasing him now because he's talking about other times when you've talked about Antonin Scalia, a variety of others. But that, if nothing else, and also, of course, you've got a link if you want to First Liberty. This is a statement by Hiram Sasser. Of course, you can see him on the news quite a bit right now talking about this. This might be the end of the ABA. Next time somebody says the ABA says, and some senator's going to say, I don't care.
Yeah, because right now, if the ABA made you qualified, then you'll say it. But a lot of times people just ignore the negative ratings and don't mention it.
Yeah. Well, there is a lot more to cover, but maybe when we come back from the break, Kelly, you might even talk about what we can do, because I know you probably have some action items on your website. We have some action items as well. A little bit later, of course, we also want to talk about this Sunday being a very significant time for prayer for the persecuted church. And under Penna Dexter's bio, you'll see this particular article that was done by Steve Stockman, so we'll talk about that. But I think when we come back, isn't it time to talk about impeachment? We've done a little bit, but let's get into these regulations and what might happen in the Senate. So we've got some more to cover, and we will do that right after this.
When you give to Point of View, does it make a difference? Jeremy Dyes would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kerby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Penna Dexter and Kerby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. And that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the Truth Team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, Weekend Edition. And whether or not this was actually a formal vote on impeachment, we will discuss around the roundtable, but at least the vote of 232 to 196. 194 Republicans, 2 Democrats voted against it. 231 Democrats, 1 non-voting voted for it, and 1 independent who used to be a Republican is now an independent. That's how you get to that number. This will at least have the hearings open. One of the things I said yesterday for our roundtable is I quoted from Proverbs 18, verse 17. You know, when a man presents a view, it seems right until another person comes to examine that. And at least these procedures, as inadequate as they are, Kelly, I agree with you on that completely, at least allow something for the Republicans to do, but nothing like what happened under the Nixon or Clinton impeachments. True?
Well, yeah, I was going to say what you said is great, which is called due process.
Yes.
But it's not being allowed here.
Not quite.
I mean,
getting closer, but it's
again,
still not due process.
Again, Adam Schiff is basically the prosecutor.
Yes.
And the way they've got it now is, hey, you can even though you're the defendant and you're on the side of the defendant, you can bring some witnesses as long as the prosecutor agrees with your witness.
Yeah.
I'm like, nobody would accept this. This is totally unacceptable. And then the idea that still some of these things are being done in secret, that's just not how we do things. Every American understands due process. And again, what I predict you're going to see is what you see now, which is you're never going to see this go above the number of people who are Democrats and just hate Trump and didn't want him elected in the first place. And that's what you're seeing. They want him impeached. Now, again, that's very short-sighted in their thinking. The Republicans did the same thing under Clinton. They're kind of short-sighted. They wanted him impeached because they didn't like him either. That's not how to use impeachment. But I just don't think it's going to go beyond that because they're doing it all the wrong way. I mean, it's almost like Trump's best friends are his enemies. I mean, it really is amazing. They are so overplaying their hand. It's like people that don't even want to like Trump are kind of being forced to like Trump because Americans don't like the idea of taking away due process, being unfair, abusing power, even against somebody you don't like. You start to go, wait a second, that's not fair. I wouldn't want them to do that to anybody I know. I wouldn't want them to do that to me. We don't operate with secret trials. We don't say prosecutors get to decide what witnesses, that you're not allowed to defend yourself, that you can't cross-examine witnesses. That this is so foreign to everything about us that, and this is before we even get to the actual merits of what it is they're charging him with, which is basically we don't like your foreign policy, which is, again, not an impeachment. It's not a high crime and misdemeanor. So it's just on so many levels. I mean, we'll see, but I'll be shocked if this doesn't blow up in their face between now and the election.
So this is we will see because it's been in the Intelligence Committee and they've kept a lot of things secret, and Trump and the Republicans have not been able to call witnesses. So, when you read about this in the media, you read some stories that say, well, it's going to change that now that it's an open, passed resolution for inquiry. But really, the Democrats get to veto anything while it's in the Intelligence Committee, right?
Yes.
And now if it will move to the Judiciary Committee. Will it be more open? Does it have to be more open then? Yeah. Or will it necessarily not?
Well, I think ultimately they control everything, right?
So they can really leak. They can do what they've been doing. Leak out the things that seem negative and not leak out and keep secret the rest.
Well, sure. Yeah. And then some of these are going to become public, which I think is going to be problematic because you can't leak false stories. I mean, the yesterday was a great example.
Yes.
You had a guy testify supposedly who said there was nothing in Trump's call that was illegal or problematic. And yet all the reporting from the Washington Post and all these other people was he confirmed the earlier people that what Trump said was illegal and quid pro quo and all. I mean, so you're like, that's so I guess you're hoping that they only read that newspaper because it's just false. And you can do that when people can't see it. And then when people can see it, then everybody kind of has to tell the truth. All the media people do.
That was best example of fake news. Just to give everybody some perspective here, because this one we didn't post, but maybe we should have. And that is when they voted to actually have an inquiry into Richard Nixon, 410-4. Even when the Republican-controlled House wanted to have an inquiry into Bill Clinton, that one still passed 258-176. So you don't have anything like that. And back to what Kelly's pointing out, if you read this fine print, and some of us have taken the time to do so, the request to seek subpoena of a witness is subject to the concurrence of the chair, which essentially says that when the chair agrees, then you can have your witness. And if you go back to the one that we have posted, every other one actually said that you had the situation in which both had to be in unanimity. So he had both the chair and then the minority chair agree. And in this particular case, it isn't the due process that we've come to expect in America.
No, and in fact, the reports are that when the Republicans, even in these secret committees, asked questions that was going to reveal information that was going to be damaging to the other side, Schiff refused to let the person answer the question. I mean, so this is really, really not anything like our system of justice. I mean, they've used words like star chamber, Soviet type. I mean, that's really what it is. It's totally foreign to what Americans expect and demand.
Let me just mention that because that was a poster yesterday. I don't know if anybody saw it, but the House Minority Whip, Steve Scalise, remember the one that was shot in the baseball field, had a poster and it said Soviet-style impeachment proceedings, and it was superimposed over an image of the St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow. So that was actually a poster he held up when they had their vote. He was one of those 196 that voted against it.
I think it's just so interesting that Trump, right off the bat, the transcript of the call was put out there. So we have the transcript of the call that's supposed to be impeachable. And what they've done is they brought out all these experts to give their opinion on whether that is okay or not. If the called, is it okay? Was it impeachable? Was it out of bounds? And so really, it's all about. I mean, we already know what happened. We've known what happened the whole time.
Yeah, I've done this. I think
crazy.
I did this once before, but I gave people homework, and I was like, everybody's homework at Point of View, especially if you think if you're in the 47%, maybe you didn't vote for Trump, you don't like him. Impeachment's a different story. If you're going to say you should impeach him, then you need to have read the transcript. It only takes you 10 minutes to read the transcript. I mean, no time at all. This weekend you can read it. Read it and tell yourself whether you think that's, oh, yeah, you should be impeached for that conversation. Your answer is going to be, well, of course not. This is not an impeachable offense. Impeachable offense, again, this is the death penalty in politics. This is high crimes. This is treason. This is, if you don't like them, I mean, we're a year away. A year and 2 days away right now? I mean, vote them out of office. But if you use impeachment this way, you're going to do exactly what de Tocqueville said, and you're going to really sully our whole political system. Because now, I mean, guess what? If the Democrats do this, the Republicans will do it too. And now impeachment will just be, let's smear the other guy. Let's hold secret hearings. Let's do all these things that violate due process. They're just, hey, you did that to us, we're going to do it to you, and that's where we're going to go. And people shouldn't accept that.
It seems like they're making a very strange calculation, because what they'll do is they'll gin up support among the base that's wanted to impeach him since day one. So they'll get that enthusiasm going with people that were already going to vote for him. But what they'll do on the other side of this, I think, is make people that weren't madly in love with Trump, but as you said, they want to preserve a sane system. And so they will not vote for the Democrat in the election. It could affect the Senate.
The Washington Post poll, not the Fox News poll. The Washington Post poll said 82% of independents said no to this impeachment.
Yes.
I mean, that should tell you a lot if you're looking. And then and think of it. That's what it is now. Now, some people argue, well, they'll be convinced. I think it's much more likely the longer this goes on, the angrier these people are going to be with how unfair what's going on and how this is like, why aren't you doing something for me? You're supposed to
work on healthcare.
Yeah. What are you passing? Instead, you're doing this ridiculous abuse of your time. I just think it's going to get worse over time and it's already at that level. So I really think this is just really dumb on a lot of levels. But I think people get so, seething with anti-Trump that they don't think through whether what they're doing is maybe going to backfire on them.
Love to hear your comments. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Last February, in a one-hour radio interview, Jeff Younger told me the story of his battle to save his then 6-year-old son, James. When James was 3, his mother, Jeff's ex-wife, began dressing and treating him as a girl. She began taking him to a transgender-affirming therapist, and she obtained a court order enjoining Jeff from dressing James as a boy for school, from teaching him that he is a boy, and from providing religious teachings about sexuality and gender. She has even dressed James as a little drag queen for FaceTime communications with his dad. James' mother instructed school authorities that he be treated as a girl. He arrives at school dressed as a girl and obediently answers to his girl name, Luna. But when James is with his dad and twin brother Jude, he's all boy. When he's with family friends, he plays with the boys as a boy. In fact, one dad in whose home James plays says he vehemently refuses toys, games, and clothing that could be even the slightest bit feminine. This little boy, now age 7, is being socially transitioned to become a trans female, a process being orchestrated by his mother, a pediatrician. To stop this, Jeff has been attempting to get more custodial authority over James and Jude. Last week, a judge granted Jeff some authority for medical decisions. Jeff is desperate to prevent James from being subjected to the first step in a medical transition, which can occur as early as age 8 with puberty-blocking medication. Surgical castration and hormones for life are the next steps. Amazingly, some doctors provide this unethical treatment. This is child abuse. James' story has finally gotten the attention of the Texas governor and attorney general. Hopefully, they will take strong action and recommend legislation to protect James and other children who are victims of this destructive agenda and some really bad parenting. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
By the way, if you'd like to join our conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Do you think the impeachment inquiry is a waste of time? Do you think it's necessary? I'd love to get your thoughts. And that is one issue. Another one is, Kelly, I see our first caller wants to talk about Joe Biden. You were looking at a poll just the other day that found that actually more people want an investigation of Joe Biden and Hunter Biden than want an investigation of Donald Trump. Is that
I
fair?
know. Yeah, that's again, another example of a little bit of backfire here from the attempt. But yeah, that most people think that should be investigated than the Trump, phone call.
Well, let's take a phone call that wants to bring that up. And so, Kat in New Hampshire, you have the floor. What would you like to add to our conversation today?
Thank you. I did want to tell you I'm an independent voter, and so I did hear you mention that. But my question is this. How is it that Joe Biden, a former U.S. VP, is on video recording, smiling and laughing about the fact that he, as the vice president, strong-armed a foreign government, refusing to approve funds for that government until a prosecutor who was investigating his son for wrongdoing was fired? And by doing that, given the role that he had as a vice president of the United States, how can he put the entire population of the United States at risk and in danger in order to save his one son engaged in illegal activities and still be walking around free? And isn't there a retroactively enforceable U.S. federal code that covers behavior such as that jeopardize the safety of the U.S. population? Because Biden at least should forfeit any money and health care benefits he gained while he was serving as a U.S. vice president and strong arming other countries. And that's my question. And one other thing, just before I get off, is Biden did say that no one's above the law. So that includes you, Joe Biden. Thanks.
Wow.
Okay. First of all, there have always been in foreign policy people that strong arm, even if it benefits them. And there are some great articles and books that have been written over the years about this. But the point is that there almost seems to be more of a focus right now by the media on whether or not Donald Trump's phone call constitutes what I think almost everybody knows actually did happen with Joe Biden and Ukraine. Is that fair?
Right. Yeah. It's a little more obvious that Biden was, definitely pressuring in a way that helped him personally, his family personally. Now, again, would you be able to criminally do something in that situation? I don't think so, because you would have to prove some things that you can't prove. For instance, Biden would argue, well, I was saying get rid of the prosecutor because he wasn't being aggressive enough.
But with Biden in the vice presidency with that Ukraine portfolio, his responsibility, there's no way.
Yeah, it smells.
That they're going to go after.
It smells to high heaven, and I think everybody knows when you've got a guy who was kicked out of the military because of drugs, and within, I think, 2 weeks, it was really quickly, all of a sudden, he's got a job making $50,000 a month as a board member of a Ukrainian oil and gas company when he has no experience in oil and gas, but he does happen to be the son of the vice president of the United States who's working with the Ukraine. I mean, everybody in the country knows immediately this is really wrong. I mean, I'm not saying it's criminal. It's just everybody knows it's sleazy, it's wrong, it's abusive, and nobody likes that.
People said that back then too.
Yeah, and you don't see any of this with Trump's children, right? I mean, they try to argue that, like, for instance, he has a hotel in D.C. and that's somehow a violation, but you don't see that kind of thing going on. But that is clearly, I think everybody knows what's going on there, right? And then with Trump, it's like, read the phone call. I mean, he when he brings up the Biden thing, it's way separated from all the other things they're talking about. The president is clearly saying, and everybody knows this, that Ukraine has a lot of corruption issues.
Sure.
And he's saying that some of this meant, Russia and you trying to impact our election, which everybody said that was something important over the last 2 years when they're doing that investigation. And he's just saying, I would love your help because some of this supposedly came from the Ukraine. And look, if that includes Biden in the process, I mean, so what? I mean, we just want to know what happened, and that's what he was after. I don't think.
Well, he was also after the origins of the investigation into him.
Right. Exactly.
Of course. Yeah. The dossier and everything. For people that might say, I want to read about this. I don't want to just, try to rely on the Washington Post. The best book on that is Peter Schweizer's book, who's been on the program with us many times before. Book entitled Secret Empires, How American Political Class Hides Corruption and Enriches Family and Friends.
Yes.
This is not only in the video that Kat was talking about, it's in the books. And we've been interviewing Peter Schweizer.
Yep.
so long ago that was 3 studios back. So it goes back at least almost 10 years. We've been interviewing Peter Schweitzer on some of his books. And he's an equal opportunity grief giver. He was one that brought down one of the Republican Speaker of the House, for example, and some other things. So, I mean, he's gone after any corruption on either side.
I interviewed him once on Disney.
Yeah, remember that? So he's been around for a long time. But you could read his book on Secret Empires, which came out a year and a half ago, and that's well known. And yet it's almost like everybody at the Washington Post, New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS don't even know that Peter Schweitzer exists, don't even know that all of this has been well documented, and even exists, as Kat points out just a minute ago, in a videotape.
Right.
Yeah.
And look, I just think we need to be clear. Do I think that there's some sort of criminal violation in what happened there? No, I don't. I don't think nothing you could win. And so, but that's much further than what they're accusing Trump of. I mean, that's much more extreme than what they're trying to attack, President Trump of. So that's the thing. I think everybody sees the hypocrisy, and the fact that the poll comes out and says that more Americans think that the Biden situation should be investigated than the Trump situation tells you that they see it, they get it. Everybody immediately knows that situation with Hunter Biden, whether it's legal or not, it's just not right, and it's not something we want leaders doing. I don't want to elect somebody who's going to act like that. I think most people approach it that way.
Let's take Tim in Ohio. Tim, what would you like to add to our conversation?
Yeah, I guess one thing I want to get is sort of a point of clarification on this on impeachment. I watch Fox News a lot, and Alan Dershowitz is on there quite, and I like him, even though we probably differ on some things politically. But he's consistently criticized this process, and he said repeatedly about it. Where's the crime?
Yeah.
Okay. Today, I've heard several people talking about it and say you don't have to have a crime to have impeachment. That is a purely political thing, and yes, the word high crimes is right there in the Constitution.
Right.
So I guess I'd like a clarification.
Yeah, you don't look for a crime. You have to at least have an allegation of a crime. Is that fair, Kelly?
Yeah. I mean, technically, it doesn't have to be a crime, like meaning some statute, right? Because it really is how the Congress interprets that constitutional phrase. I mean, it doesn't lay out a code or whatever.
I understand that.
But I think the reality is it's got to be a crime.
Well, you couldn't get away with being a congressman voting for impeachment if there wasn't a crime. That would really be over the top.
I think so. I mean, but I think the crime is just the beginning. Not only a crime, it would need to be a high crime. I mean, it would need to be. The whole point of this is it's something really, 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 really serious. So serious that we're going to overturn an election of the people of the United States. So that's something more like treason, more like bribery, in a real specific way. And they're talking about nothing. Really what they're talking about now is we just think he's really a doofus and disagree with his foreign policy. And it's like, well, then elect somebody else. But that's not this. It certainly doesn't fit the definition in the Constitution.
Not a vote of no confidence. That was one of the things the framers considered and rejected. That's why they had the standard so high. We need to take a break, and we'll take some more phone calls. 1-800-351-1212 right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, it is our weekend edition. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. Almost a full bank of phone calls. We'll try to get to those in just a minute, but I got a few action items. First of all, one of those is that this hour we're going to talk a little bit about the prayer for the persecuted Christians on this Sunday. So those of you, the pastors, we'll talk about that in just a minute. You can find a very good article under Penna Dexter's bio today, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Number two, if you want to contact your various representatives, especially I would think the two senators in your state about Lawrence Van Dyke, that is another action item. But Kelly Shackelford, as I go to firstliberty.org, got a pop-up menu, and there is a way in which people can get a free pocket Constitution and Declaration of Independence. And I think this is important because last time I looked at the Constitution, it says that Congress has the sole power of impeachment. Not the Speaker of the House has the sole power of impeachment.
It's the whole body, right?
Yeah, not the head of the House Intelligence Committee has the sole power of impeachment. So maybe it's time for us to read our constitutions.
I think so. And that's why I do think, like we've had a few callers already today, ask questions. And maybe it's because they have a constitution, or maybe, we would clarify things to have one. But if you don't have one, like in your drawer or somewhere at home, it's real easy. I guess you can go to pointofview.net and just click on the First Liberty. But if you go to First Liberty, you spell out firstliberty.org, it'll pop up, and you can get a constitution to have with you and look at what it says about impeachment. And when people say these type of things, you can look at it for yourself. Yeah, it does say that Congress has the sole power of impeachment, which means that what's going on right now is not really impeachment.
Not really what's going on.
And so what would happen in impeachment is they would vote to have an impeachment process, to start the process, and they would lay all that out. They didn't even do that this week. People think they voted on some rules, but it wasn't impeachment. And in fact, Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer said that when they were asked, no, this is not, so they're
this
doing
is a sham.
It is. It's
Yeah.
not really impeachment. And again, if you're really doing impeachment, the way it works is the House is the one who sort of files the indictment, but the trial is done by the Senate, and you have to have 2/3, which means you would need every Democrat and 20 of the Republicans to say, yes, we convict him. So as a result of that, the House is always a bipartisan effort, because you if you do a sham effort on the House side, there's no hope of you getting bipartisan conviction on the Senate side. So it's a bipartisan process, which is why I don't think this is really about, real impeachment and conviction. This is more of a smear and more of a political ploy. And that's why we have these secret hearings and all these things. But it's not how the founders laid out impeachment, and it's not what's necessary if you really want conviction.
Well, let's take some phone calls. I think some of them want to make that very important statement. But let's go first of all to South Carolina, WMHK, and Bob, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. I'm listening to you. Very interesting. I would say most people have no idea of the impeachment process. But what I called about, I don't know if you're seeing this, the talk of civil war. As a matter of fact, a congressman in Texas last week stated he felt like we were 2/3 of the way there. And you can say that we're in a cultural civil war, and the next step is a firing war. I just like your opinions of that. It scares me to the bottom of my heart, so to speak.
Okay.
Well, this is where it's good we have a constitution. Yeah. It's good that we have the Senate in the hands of people who want to abide by the Constitution, and that the leader, Mitch McConnell, does. I mean, he's very strong on that. And so I don't think it's going to be a shooting war, no. But I do think that you have to do things right. If one party is not doing things right, in the right way, then the other party has to pull it, kind of rein things back in with their actions. They have to be very clear and very strong.
Yeah, and I mean, same way, I certainly hope we don't ever move in that direction. There is a problem with people getting more and more, the extreme's not the word, and divisive's not the word. All that's true, but it's just a lack of, I mean, people are like, they won't listen to one another. They won't talk, they won't, discussions are so difficult. There was a situation a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, I think that y'all probably remember, that I was really encouraged by. It was Ellen.
Yes.
Of course, Ellen is a lesbian, and she's obviously not a stance for biblical Christianity across the world. But she was sitting at a game. She was invited to a Dallas Cowboys football game, and she ended up sitting next to President George Bush. And she talked about how, they had a good time, and she's very funny. And but she talked about people criticized her, right? Because and her point was essentially that we don't have to hate each other if we disagree with each other. We can still sit together and talk. And, this idea that how dare you sit next to anybody you disagree with. And she really gave, I thought, a very good defense of what this country at least used to be all about. And so this real intolerance that's being expressed today, shut down your opponent, take away their free speech rights, violate all of our principles because I hate you and what you believe. That's the danger, I think. And I think really if there's a real hope in turning this around, Christians are going to have to lead the way. If there was any example of somebody who would walk into the fray and even take shots and blows to bring peace, it's Jesus. And if we're going to turn the country around, we've got to be willing to go in and show and model an example that even if I disagree with you, I can still care for you. Even if we disagree, we can still have a conversation. And not everybody's grown up enough to do that, but I think there are enough Americans that can at least take that back. And when we lose that is when we go to violence. And I pray and hope that never happens here.
Yeah.
It's really a hard call sometimes because we would be very critical of senators who would be bipartisan. I mean, I'm thinking of John McCain, for instance, because not only would he have relationships with people in the other party, often he would actually advocate their position on things. So, I think what we seek to elect is people who are able to. I look at Ted Cruz, for instance, a senator. He sponsors bills with Democrats and liberals and things where he can find that, and he's so bright and able to articulate his position on things that he never equivocates or compromises on the deeply held positions. That is the talented and principled kind of people we need to be electing and encouraging.
And he just had, who did he have? Senator Cruz just had some famous actress.
Yeah, Alyssa Milano.
Yeah, Milano, who came in and they, I think they.
I was impressed with that. That's another example of Ellen, I should say. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it was on the Second Amendment. And on gun issues, very divisive, very different. But they had a conversation. They tried to understand each other. That's the hope for the future of the country, right there.
Let's take a break. We'll take some more phone calls right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You may have heard the term cultural appropriation, but I've also found that many of our listeners were unfamiliar with the term and how it is used to criticize anyone who is not deemed to be politically correct. The online cultural appropriation police were in full view recently when a young woman decided to wear a traditional Chinese dress to her school prom. Since Kezia Dom is not Asian, this infuriated people on social media when she posted a picture of her in her dress. She thought it was beautiful. Social justice warriors saw it as bigoted and a clear example of cultural appropriation. The term cultural appropriation has been used in sociology to explain how a majority culture borrows or adapts from a minority culture some custom, fashion, or cuisine. In the past, it was a descriptive phrase. Now it has become a proscriptive phrase used to punish anyone who appropriates something from another culture. Sometimes these accusations get very confusing. Vogue, for example, was accused of cultural appropriation when it featured manicure sculptures of white women with long nails. The criticism was that black women can wear long adorned nails because that belongs to black culture. But others pointed out that long adorned nails go all the way back to the upper class women in the Ming Dynasty. They were a sign that you were too rich and powerful to do any manual labor. Should Vogue apologize to African American women or the descendants from ancient China? It all gets very confusing. Perhaps it is time to remind these critics that the meals we eat and the clothes we wear are usually the byproduct of centuries of cultural appropriation. Let's leave this young girl alone and focus on things that really are bigoted and offensive. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we'll stay on impeachment a little bit longer, and then we have a couple of other issues we wanted to put on the table. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, and let's go to James in Texas, KJRT. James, you are on. What would you like to add to our conversation?
All right. Hey, guys, I sure appreciate you guys' program. I remember you guys back in the Marlon Maddox days. Anyway, I really don't think that it's so much about impeachment with the Democrats. They know they're not going to win this thing. I think it's more about the next 4 years. I think all they're doing is just smearing this guy and smearing this guy and smearing this guy because they want to make him look so bad so that these next 4 years they can win and be in the White House. The one thing they did not put in the factor is the God factor. And I think that's why Trump is going to win this thing again. That's all I have to say.
Well, it's very good material. And by the way, for some of our new listeners, Marlon Maddox, of course, was the founder of Point of View. And Penna Dexter and I worked with him for many years. And again, we still have just a great appreciation for the forum that we have here. And Kelly has the quote now.
Yeah, I talked about this earlier, and I finally found it from Alexis de Tocqueville in 1835. Here's the quote. A decline of public morals in the United States will probably be marked by the abuse of power of impeachment as a means of crushing political adversaries or ejecting them from office. And you're like, how did he know that in 1835?
Wow. Yes.
that if you see that, realize that there's a decline of public morals in the United States. And that's what we're watching right now.
Because our government works the best with people who have a respect for a higher power and for people who have a sense of morality. And so as it goes away, you lash out with whatever weapons you can against your enemy, and impeachment is basically it's a weapon. It's not being used properly, but they're using it as a weapon.
I've got a commentary coming out. I haven't even recorded it. I've written it, but haven't recorded it yet, so it's about a week or two out. But it's on this wonderful speech by the Attorney General Bill Barr, Notre Dame. And even though it's been reported a little bit, there were some great lines about how religion helps teach, train, and habituate people to what is good. That comes from formal religious training as well as informal rules like customs and traditions. And really, you go back to this, whether it was George Washington, John Adams, James Madison, whether it was Alexander Hamilton, whether it was John Jay, almost all of them at one point said this experiment in the Republic only works if we have religious people, because that's the only place where you're going to get enough virtue and moral discipline. Because if you don't have virtue and moral discipline, then you either have anarchy, and you can't have anarchy in the streets for very long, and then you have to have government come in and establish moral restraints. And that was the argument of William Barr, Attorney General. Which, by the way,
do you just pinch yourself when you think we have an attorney general that can
understand
speak
that?
words like that?
Yeah, it sounds like David Barton or somebody like that. Instead of, it is amazing to me.
It's one of the
best.
That. Just as reading a speech, it's one of the best I've read in I don't know, maybe 10 years at least. If people have the time and want to read something, it's very, very good. And of course, as a result, he was immediately attacked.
Oh, yes.
For talking about religion.
And Inquisition and, all the kinds of things.
But the boldness of him just doing that, he knew he would be attacked.
Yes. And again, mostly they just had to ignore him because he's right. Just think about this. It's remember when Mike Huckabee ran for office, and then I'll get to another phone call here, who said, two worlds, Hucktown and your town. And in Hucktown, everybody obeys the law. Everybody's moral. Nobody uses drugs. The marriages are intact. It's a very small police force because you don't really have much to do.
Right.
And then your town with a divorce rate of 50%, people having to get drug tested, crime, graffiti, and you can recognize that if you have moral restraint on the part of the citizens, the government doesn't have to do a whole lot because everybody does the right thing. And when you have anarchy, which we seem to have more and more every day, moral anarchy, that's why we have what we have.
Mm-hmm.
So makes sense. And it's nice that the Attorney General of the United States actually understands that and gave a speech on it. So we'll come back and talk about that later. But there's a good question here, because this gets back to Kelly's question about the Constitution, the Declaration, which you're making available. Kathy in California. KNLB, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Yes, I was wondering, was President Clinton's impeachment, was it a high crime and misdemeanor that had actually gone back to Whitewaters in Mena, Arkansas? And because that began 7 months after Iran-Contra, and the news media were like a clanging cymbal over the whole incident with Monica Lewinsky in the White House.
No, I think that, I'd have to go back and look at the articles. I don't know, Kerby, if you know this off the top of your head, but the impeachment of Clinton was based upon him lying under oath.
That's right.
In a judicial proceeding, and the abuse of power of engaging in sexual abuse with a young lady who was under his employment, in the White House. And so those were now, the good question that sort of is elicited by your question further, though, is are those things at the level of a high crime or misdemeanor? And at the time, the decision was no. The reason Clinton wasn't convicted in the Senate, I don't think, was because anybody doubted that he did these things. It was because they didn't feel like they were a high
to that level.
Yeah, that's not a level of treason or the type of high crime. This again, you just have to understand in the political world, in our Constitution, this is the death penalty. This is the most ultimate, power you can use, because you're overturning the votes of the American people. So that's why it takes the House and 2/3 of the Senate, and that's why the standard is so high. And in that case, they said no, it's not a high crime or misdemeanor. So that, I think that's an interesting question, because that's one that sort of Republicans have to look in the mirror and say, ooh, maybe I kind of recognize the Democrats and see my own sin in what I'm watching now,
Well, as you say, it's an ultimate punishment, and it's also very risky for the person that's wielding it.
Yes.
For instance, the Republicans found that out
paid
with
a
Clinton.
price. Yes, they did.
And so I think a lot of Republicans would look back and say, no, we shouldn't have done it because we were hurt in the next. I mean, he won re-election and took kind of a bloodbath in Congress. So, I think there were some lessons learned. But it's funny because the Democrats, well, yes, I think they did learn it, but they're still moving along that road.
Yeah, that's why Nancy
Anyway.
didn't really want to go that direction because, there was just a concern that the Speaker of the House might set in motion the thing that will lead to the defeat of the Democratic majority in the House. Kathy did raise another question. Since, Penna, you and I were around in the 1990s, we know there were a lot of other things behind that. And she mentioned Mena, Arkansas, Whitewater, the travel
Paula
gates.
Jones.
And Paula Jones. There were just so many other issues. So in some respects, yes, what was on the articles of impeachment were simply the idea of perjury and an abuse of office. But the push was also because of all the other things that Bill and Hillary Clinton never had to pay a price for. So, I mean, there was a little bit of other political things going on there.
There was, but, we look back at Trump and we say, listen, he was elected, and we knew a lot of the things that they talk about him. And it was the same thing with Clinton. I mean, we didn't know everything about Whitewater, but we knew some things about it before he was elected.
Yeah, so anyway, that's kind of what the justification is. When we come back, though, I certainly have some other calls here, and we may get to those later. But one of the things I thought we might want to do, Penna, is focus a little bit of time on the prayer for the persecuted church. We've talked about this on the program before with some individuals. Matter of fact, one a while back who was helping us not only raise funds for those who were affected by the hurricane in Bahamas, but also help us raise funds for those in refugee camps. But I thought for just a minute, we want to focus a little bit of time on the persecuted Christians and the opportunity for you and your church to pray for them. And for those of you that are pastors, Sunday school leaders, Bible fellowship leaders, that's something we certainly want to talk about. And then if you go to our website today, you will see that we have Penna Dexter's commentary, Saving James. And that is an interview that Penna first did back in February. That was kind of a local Texas story that has now become a national story. And it brings us back to one of the other articles we've posted here on the transgender cult. This is very disturbing and effectively becoming almost child abuse, where we're taking very young children who have no idea of their gender identity, maybe are a little bit confused, then going through all sorts of treatments and surgeries and things of that nature. But this particular contentious case is one that Penn has been following for more than almost a year now. So it's been, again, one of those stories you first heard about on Point of View. Now it's become a national story. So when we come back, we'll talk about those issues, but we'll take a few more phone calls before we finish here. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, if you click on the button where Kelly Shackelford is, the first thing that pops up, it's an opportunity for you to get a Constitution and Declaration. That's at firstliberty.org. We'll be back right after this.
When you give to Point of View, does it make a difference? Jeremy Dies would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kerby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Penna Dexter and Kerby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. And that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the Truth Team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, a couple more issues to put on the table. We'll take some more of your phone calls, so stay tuned. But before we got too much more into the issue of impeachment, I did want to raise one issue, and that is the opportunity to pray for persecuted Christians. One of the articles we have here is by Steve Stockman, Why November 3rd Matters. And you can find it on our website. Just look under the bio for Penna Dexter, and you can find it there. But Penna, tell us a little bit more about the origins of that and why this is such an important time in which we should be praying for our brothers and sisters around the world.
Well, first of all, it is an important time, and I've been pleasantly surprised to see President Trump emphasize the persecuted church. And, of course, he appointed a lot of people that we have on this program to the Commission on Religious Freedom around the world. And so, I recently had Nadine Manza, who is one of those people, on the show. And so, I think there's an emphasis in this administration. And this day, International Day of Prayer for the Persecuted Church, was established a few years ago. I don't remember, maybe 10 or so years ago. And some churches will really honor the day, and they will have prayer for the persecuted church, but a lot of churches don't. So, here we are, 2 days before, and it might be difficult to get your church, unless it's a small church and you have a lot of influence, to do that. But you can do it yourself. You can pray these types of prayers. And so Steve Stockman wrote one, and he had the time to do it because he's actually in prison right now. Steve Stockman was a congressman from Texas, and he was always kind of a bold member of Congress. And we were talking about Clinton. He actually did a lot to expose the misdealings of the Clintons in the 90s. And then when the IRS attacks on nonprofits came along, he was in Congress, and he did some things for that. And he was actually, I guess he had some nonprofits that he donated to or something. And they were associated with him, and he was convicted of crimes. Now, I don't know whether he was guilty or not. It's one of those issues where I haven't read about it deeply enough. But I do know that he's a man who he stands on the Constitution, and he is an anti-corruption type person who was in Congress a long time. Now he's in prison. He wrote this piece that has nothing to do with him or his attempts to appeal his conviction, but what it does have to do with is the persecution of Christians around the world. It's exploding. It's amazing that it's worse than it's ever been. And he lists many of them and describes some of them. Like he's talking about Europe, where there's a rise of religious intolerance in Europe, where, it used to be sort of populated by Protestant and Catholic leaders, no longer. And then he talks about even Sweden and the atmosphere there. In Germany, increased frequency of attacks on Christians and Jews there. The New Zealand, in this year, there was a leftist that gunned down 49 Muslims. And then he talks about just the Democrat field of intolerant presidential candidates stoke more Christian hatred. And we've been hearing some of that on the campaign trail. So, and then he goes back to our country, and we need to be aware of the attacks on Christians that we talk about every week with Kelly and other folks from First Liberty, and that are such a, they're on all of our hearts, that Christians are attacked for their faith, not allowed to live out their faith. So it's about 2.5 pages long, and it's really just an encouragement, and it gives you a knowledge of what's going on in that arena of persecution, to give you the ability to have informed prayer. So you could use this at your church if your church is going to talk about this. You could print it out and take it in, or even in your own personal prayers. I would recommend using it. We posted it here at Point of View, and I think you'll be able to look for it all weekend and print it out or do whatever you want to with it. But I wanted to put it up. His wife, Patty, is actually the one that brought it to my attention this week. So thank you to Point of View for posting that.
And again, it's entitled Why November 3rd Matters. That's this Sunday, so let me encourage you to pray for that. And that is one of those issues. In just a minute, I want to get to the piece that Penna Dexter has written on saving James. It goes all the way back to February of this year, in which she did the first interview with Jeff Younger. Well, let me take another phone call real quickly before we get into that, and then you will be able to hear her commentary, which, of course, we air at the quarter to the hour each hour. But let's go to Maine, WSEW. Steve, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. Actually, I called quite a bit earlier while you were on the topic of the differences in the way people are thinking about, say, presidential candidates or other, just political issues versus their own beliefs, and how harsh. And I was interested in that topic. And I just had experienced it with personal friends, and then I just saw the exact same thing happening on news reports and Christian radio stations that I listen to that where people use really harsh language, like calling people hypocrites for say, a Christian supporting candidate. And it just led me to think about King David and, say, Matthew, where, these were not perfect people. They were sinful people, and yet Jesus loves them. And, we are so quick to come down on our friends or family even because of their support for somebody who is not perfect. And I think we need to change that way of thinking. And we need to be aware of that way of thinking and compassionate towards people who do think that way, because it's in our society. It's built in.
And I've heard various talk show hosts mention this, and Christian leaders mention this, that they've in the past sometimes had friends that disagreed about politics, and they would disagree, talk about it, still be the best of friends. And the other day I heard a Larry Elder say, I had a friend all my life. We were the best of friends, and we worked together in a law firm, and now we are not friends because I support Trump. And that's a deal breaker for his friend. I mean, it's just amazing to me. When you think about not so long ago, I guess since I'm the old one around the table here, where you had Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill who would argue with each other, and then they would go out to dinner with each other, and this is so different now. There are some examples of people that reach across the aisle. We just talked about Ted Cruz. We talk about even more recently, we've been interviewing some of the members of Congress that reach across the aisle.
I would say Van Taylor is one
Van
of
Taylor
those.
is exactly what I was going to say. Some of our listeners may not know Van Taylor, but I interview him on a pretty regular basis. And the other day, the Dallas Morning News did a story saying, and here is a bipartisan Republican. Now, Van Taylor's more conservative probably than anybody around the table, at least as conservative as everybody around the table, yet he will work with Democrats on all sorts of issues. But those are the rarities now, and I think that's part of it. But, Steve, it's just amazing to me that I hear story after story now from people that have positions of authority, but also just day-to-day folks who say, I've lost a friend because I supported or disagreed with Donald Trump, whatever the case might be. And I think we need to be a little more gracious, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up. We are just about ready to take a break, but before we do so, let's set that up, because Penna Dexter, your commentary on saving James really goes all the way back to February. High marks to Penna Dexter covering a story originally that was kind of a Texas story that's now become a national story. And this is just kind of insanity where, let's, again, just before we hear your piece, talk about what you first found out from Jeff Younger about his son, James.
Well, I found out that he was in a custody battle with his former wife, and that he had a little boy who he wanted to affirm as a boy, because he is a biological boy, but the mother, his ex-wife, was moving him in the direction of being a girl, not only giving him a girl name, but sending him to school as a girl in dresses and things like that. And it broke my heart to even hear about something like that. When I had him in the studio, it was even worse than that. I mean, he was at risk of being sent to jail if he tried to convince his little boy that he was a boy, or if he did anything like that to either of his twin boys. And so he was really under a rough kind of draconian regime in how he acted in his own home with this little boy. And so, we did that interview, and, everybody began talking about it in Texas. They even talked about it in Austin during the legislature, but nothing was ever done by our state legislature about, perhaps protecting him. But it was not that long after the legislature closed up shop and there were some court battles that our governor, lieutenant governor, got wind of it. Now I think something will be done to protect this little boy, James, from being forced into being really a little girl, or not really a little girl, but a trans female, I guess is the proper term.
Well, let's play this. And again, those of you listening on a computer can hear it, or if you want to go to a computer or just go to your Point of View app, you can read that. When we come back, we'll talk about the implications of this particular case. It's Penna Dexter's commentary, Saving James. We'll be back right after this.
Last February, in a 1-hour radio interview, Jeff Younger told me the story of his battle to save his then 6-year-old son, James. When James was 3, his mother, Jeff's ex-wife, began dressing and treating him as a girl. She began taking him to a transgender-affirming therapist, and she obtained a court order enjoining Jeff from dressing James as a boy for school, from teaching him that he is a boy, and from providing religious teachings about sexuality and gender. She has even dressed James as a little drag queen for FaceTime communications with his dad. James' mother instructed school authorities that he be treated as a girl. He arrives at school dressed as a girl and obediently answers to his girl name, Luna. But when James is with his dad and twin brother Jude, he's all boy. When he's with family friends, he plays with the boys as a boy. In fact, one dad in whose home James plays says he vehemently refuses toys, games, and clothing that could be even the slightest bit feminine. This little boy, now age 7, is being socially transitioned to become a trans female, a process being orchestrated by his mother, a pediatrician. To stop this, Jeff has been attempting to get more custodial authority over James and Jude. Last week, a judge granted Jeff some authority for medical decisions. Jeff is desperate to prevent James from being subjected to the first step in a medical transition, which can occur as early as age 8 with puberty-blocking medication. Surgical castration and hormones for life are the next steps. Amazingly, some doctors provide this unethical treatment. This is child abuse. James' story has finally gotten the attention of the Texas governor and attorney general. Hopefully, they will take strong action and recommend legislation to protect James and other children who are victims of this destructive agenda and some really bad parenting. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Kelly Shackelford, Penna Dexter with me for just a few more minutes. Let me just give you a program note that next week we have Robert and Nancy Wogomuth on talking about their book, and that will be a lot of fun. Of course, we had Robert Wogomuth on just a while ago, Robert Hutchison, Mary Jo Sharp, but also have David Limbaugh on, Guilty by Reason of Insanity. One of the things I love about David Limbaugh is he wrote a book years ago called Persecution, which was a list of all these that now has become what Liberty Institute calls undeniable. You remember those lists? And so this latest one, Guilty by Reason of Insanity, and here's a good example, Penna Dexter, of insanity, saying that a child that young has any clue as to whether or not he wants to be a boy or a girl when they grow up. We have studies, lots of studies now that have been surfacing of what's called transgender regret after they make the decision, they have the hormonal treatment, they have the surgery, then they regret this. So to be forced by a court to tell the father he can't have an influence on his son, which is just horrible enough. And then let's point out one other thing that Kelly's pointed out before. The mother's a pediatrician. Who's going to want to send their kid to that pediatrician who is actually trying to force a boy to actually go through these treatments to become a girl?
Unfortunately, there are more and more pediatricians like her. But, you know, I will say, first of all, there's all these teenagers that are choosing to present as the opposite sex. They're making these decisions that are just terrible for their health, and some of them are irreversible. So that's bad. I mean, I think that's terrible in itself. But here, this is a 7-year-old boy. And when he was 3, his mother started this process of, because he pulled out a girl toy from McDonald's, you know, and just a couple of things like that made her think, well, he's thinking that he's a girl, and I'm going to affirm that. And I think she got it. There was an agenda beginning. It was bubbling up about affirmation of kids who are transgender. And so she must have been part of that, or been influenced by people that that think that's the way to go. And so what she did was she gave him a girl name, Luna. His name is James. Luna was the name. And then she put him in school. She instructed the school to treat him as a girl. She dressed him as a girl. When he's with his father, he dresses as a boy. He wants to be a boy. Mm-hmm. He likes his hair to be short. When he's with other friends, he plays boy things with boys. He doesn't even like to have anything feminine when he's away from his mom. So it's the poor child is being torn in that. So that's bad enough. But then when he's 8, or at least sometime very soon after 8, depending on the particular child, the transgender sort of movement recommends these puberty blocking drugs. And then, you know, a few years down the road, you get hormones. And then you can choose whether or not to have the radical surgery. So that's where he's headed if his dad doesn't intervene. And that's why his dad he's sacrificed everything to try to stop this. And it's been a real battle. And finally now the authorities in Texas are getting active about it. I wish they had done it during the legislature, but Matt Krause, who we have in this studio a lot, he's spoken out on this, and he says he wishes the legislature did something on it too. He said this is not a partisan issue at all. This is an issue of the welfare of a child. And so, you know, he's going to be vocal on this too. In fact, I think he's going to be introducing something. But they need to do something before the next legislature meets to protect this little boy.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think most point of view listeners will easily say what is happening, what the mother pediatrician is attempting to do to her boy is child abuse. And thank goodness that the father now has some rights where she can't just do any sort of medical procedure or whatever to this boy. He has to agree. Thank goodness. But really, just the even people attempting to do this to their children at 7 years old or whatever, I mean, you know, they ought to lose custody. But we've just completely lost our mind in a lot of places in this country, and it's going to take people not being silent. Because I think a lot of people hear this stuff and they think, that's crazy. These people are wrong, but they're like,
I'm not going to do anything about it.
Yeah, I'm not going to. It looks like I might get in trouble. Somebody might yell at me or something. Well, you know, we've got, I bet it's 90% of the country, I don't know what it is, I bet it's high, that know that this is wrong and they need to speak up to stop it, because there are a lot of kids that are being impacted by this. And if it's because none of us have the courage to say this is wrong, which it obviously is, then, you know, that's not good.
You know, it goes to so much of what's out there on this issue right now, like, for instance, forcing people in certain places to use certain pronouns that are so opposite of what you know to be true. But in order to keep your job, you go ahead and do it, for instance. Also, the whole athletics issue where
that's it.
Biological men are competing on girls' teams now and winning. I mean, to me, that, you know, that just makes common sense that you wouldn't allow that, yet we are allowing it. And a lot of times, because of this woke culture we're in right now, I guess woke is the new word for politically correct, but whatever, people are afraid. They're fearful. And, you know, there are punishments in some arenas, especially public arenas, schools and things like that, for just stating the truth. So, you know, I think that's where this James Younger story has been allowed to bubble up, But I think it's so egregious now that perhaps it will paint a picture that will allow people to start thinking a little bit more clearly about this issue.
Well, first of all, let me just mention that your Viewpoints commentary is there. It is one that we send out on Saturday. They send out mine Monday through Friday, and this one would come to you on Saturday. But you can go right now to Point of View and print it out. And first of all, just high marks to Penna Dexter. You covered the story long before most people even knew about it. That first interview was back in February, so that is amazing to me. And it's a good example of you heard it first on Point of View, if you're listening to Point of View, and maybe a good justification to support Point of View. But let's get some action items here. Kelly Shackelford, first of all, we have an individual being borked right now. I think there would be an opportunity to contact your 2 United States senators, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's very easy to do. And again, Lawrence Van Dyke is the Christian man who's being attacked because, again, they can't stand the fact that he holds to biblical and conservative views in his own personal life, which really has nothing to do with, his acumen as a lawyer and a judge and really all of that. So it's just ridiculous what's going on. It's so over the top and so baseless that it's probably also risking the ability of the ABA to continue to engage in these type of partisan attacks when they're supposed to be unbiased. So you can call it's just real easy. You can call your senator and say, I support Lawrence Van Dyke getting on the court. And these are the kind of people we want on the court, especially in the Ninth Circuit, which is where he is. So, and you can certainly say something about the ABA. They shouldn't be listening to the ABA anymore. They've really lost any privilege they had at being able to speak. When the head of their, so-called neutral review group is a person who contributed to Lawrence Van Dyke's political opponent, that tells you that they don't seem to be interested in, fairness. And one of the people, I think the letter I saw was from Nevada. It was a well-known attorney from Nevada that had been a member of the ABA for 38 years. And I think he ended it by saying he was cutting up his card, and that would no longer be the case.
Wow. Let me just mention, we do have the phone number for the Senate switchboard on there. We have it, at the moment, Steve Menashe's name up there, but we'll put Lawrence Van Dyke's name up there. But the switchboard number is still accurate, 202-224-3121, 202-224-3121. So that is an action item. And the other action item is if you click on the picture of Kelly Shackelford, you'll see that it will take you to First Liberty, or you can just simply go to firstliberty.org. The pop-up gives you a constitution,
Yeah,
right?
get a free constitution. I mean, if you're going to talk about impeachment with your friends or any of these other issues, it'd be great to know the language.
So again, we have David Limbaugh on Monday, and also Robert and Nancy Wogomuth, and later in the week we have Robert Hutchison, Mary Jo Sharp, all sorts of really good people that I think you'll want to hear about. So we're doing apologetics, we're doing issues, we're doing all sorts of things, and so I hope that you will join us next week, but I hope you enjoy the weekend. Most importantly, I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Just great to have Kelly and Penna here. It'll be another month before we see Kelly again, but we'll see you back here on Monday right here on Point of View.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221, or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.